Welcome to the Noir Poise podcast, where wisdom is power is more than just a motto.
It's our way of life. While we don't claim to have all the answers, we're dedicated to delving deeper into different topics through meaningful conversations. As a duo, we bring different viewpoints to the table, enriching our joint journey towards growth and poise.
Join us as we explore and unlearn to relearn while striving to navigate life with poise. We got carried away last time and mainly focused on the male perspective, which was awesome. I learned a lot. A lot of my assumptions were validated, but there was a lot of new information I learned that was really insightful. So hopefully we can keep on that same mindset in this episode where we focus more so on the woman's point of view. So before we dive deep into this conversation, I'm curious to hear from you what your perspective is when it comes to what women crave for when it comes to safe spaces.
I think what women crave the most in a safe space is to be validated.
Like most people.
Yes, like most people, but I think it's more specific for women. And I say that because I know that I've done this before, and I'm sure countless of other men have done this as well, which is be dismissive.
Mm-hmm.
There are times when I've heard you say something, express something, and I'm not gonna lie, in the back of my mind, it's she's complaining again.
Mm.
And although at least I try not to show you I'm being dismissive, I know in the back of my mind I'm being dismissive, which, as we've said many times before, what you truly feel inside eventually comes out. So
yeah, because I was just gonna say that I feel that. So
I'm sure there's times when I dismiss you, or men in general just dismiss their female counterparts because they think you're complaining again.
Mm-hmm.
So I would say validation is probably what women want the most. I don't know if you just want one or two.
No, that's good. I mean, you can give more if you have more. I just want to hear your perspective before we kind of touch on different factors of it. And just a disclaimer, I don't have all the answers. I'm going to speak from my perspective, my point of view, but that's not going to be the case for every woman out there. I'm just going to use my experience from conversation, what I've noticed, and from my personal experience, and gather some data, I guess you could say, and use that for the discussion. But I just want to point out that this is not for every woman. At the end of the day, you kind of have to discuss certain things with your particular partner in order to find out what it is that they need. So yes, validation is actually definitely one of them, in my opinion. I wouldn't say it's the only thing or the main thing, but that I think is definitely a factor. And in a general aspect, I don't even think it's just women. I think most people want validation. I hear that all the time. That's one of the things that everyone craves, man or woman. But yes, when you said dismissive, I was like, ding, 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 ding in my head, because I do think that's something that tends to occur. And I think it's because men and women think differently in most cases. Women, we are more detail oriented and more emotional. I know people sometimes hate hearing that, but that's just the truth. If you understand science, you understand how our bodies work, how our cycle is throughout the 4-week period in a month, it's just what it is. We are more emotional. Men tend to be more stable mentally because you're not fluctuating in hormones. And if we want to state facts when it comes to science, hormonal imbalance naturally affects your thoughts, your emotions, your mood, how you react. Not saying we are imbalanced hormonally, but the point I'm trying to make is our gender plays a factor,
right,
in the way that we think, the way that we act, and the way that we feel compared to men. So yes, validation is definitely one of them. But on a general basis, I feel like most women have to feel secure in their relationship. I think that plays a large part in if they can open up to you and if they do feel safe.
Secure in what sense?
Secure emotionally, in my opinion, of course. And that comes with illustrating that you are a man of honor, a man of integrity. You can be trusted. You are supportive. Things like that naturally, I think, will lead towards the direction of a woman being able to be vulnerable with you and feel safe in your presence. So, yes, security emotionally. Of course, security in other ways, I'm sure, but we're focusing more on the ability to express certain emotions, right? So it would be definitely on the emotional aspect.
But what does that look like? Remember, men are very practical because I know there were times when I believed that I was being available to you, but you came back to me and said, no, you weren't because of XYZ. So you used the words integrity, honor, security. I'm sure 9 out of 10 men out there who are listening are thinking, I have integrity. I'm using honor, I'm providing security, but those same men may have women who may feel like they're unable to be vulnerable around them. So that's why I'm looking for practical examples of what does that look like so guys like me could understand, okay, this is what I need to do or this is what I need to stop doing.
Well, yeah, most men are probably thinking they're providing security on a physical form, but a lot of men don't provide security emotionally. And you actually pointed it out based on what you said, what your perspective would be. If you're being dismissive when your wife is expressing some emotions that, of course, you may not understand, which that's usually the case when someone's being vulnerable. You're not going to understand exactly what they're expressing or what they're going through. But like we discussed in the previous episode, having grace is one of the important factors. So if you're being dismissive, you're actually not providing security emotionally. And to touch back on what you said again, while you may not be saying, oh, she's complaining again, or, oh, why is this always a problem? Oh, just do it. Because I think a lot of men tend to think like, okay, solve the problem and get to it, which there's nothing wrong with, solving, but if you have a problem, solve it. I'm a believer in that as well. But I think the dismissive aspect is the lack of knowledge and understanding, like I mentioned before, about the human body, about how our body works, how hormones impact the way that we may feel, may impact the way that we may act. It may impact if we're going to cry or not. That's just the truth, to be honest with you. And I think because of that, you guys tend to be dismissive. I think I said this to you before. The way I try to explain it to men is while she may be expressing something and tears may be coming down her eyes, or it may seem like a very drastic form of expression, or it may come out a little bit more dramatic than it should based on the situation. Just keep in mind that what she's expressing isn't false. It's probably a feeling that's been there, but it's probably just exaggerated in the moment if she's hormonal. The first thing that comes to mind is like a postpartum mother, because that's something we've experienced where your hormones are just out of whack for a very long period of time. It takes a very long time to get back to your natural state. For many women, it takes a year, and that's not even the case for every woman. Your body takes a very long time, depending on the person, to get back to its normal state. And that's a particular situation where men tend to be dismissive because they're assuming that, oh, she's emotional, she's complaining again, why is this an issue, so on and so forth. But understanding that what she may be expressing in the moment is not false information. She feels it. It's just probably coming out in a more dramatic form than it would have come out if you were to express it. Does that make sense?
It doesn't. I'm really glad that you said that because I know before you expressed this during a conversation, I think it was a few weeks back, I thought that there are certain things you express that I am able to filter out, meaning I believe is whether it's your hormones or just regular emotional things. I can filter that out and dismiss it. But there are also times when you've expressed something and I don't have those thoughts of, okay, she's complaining again, because I've not only heard you say it before, but I've heard you say it across multiple different seasons. So I know this is something that you actually mean.
Mm-hmm.
But there are times when if I notice that you're a bit annoyed or frustrated or tired and you say something, I think that's when I dismiss it, because in my mind, I'm thinking this is just emotional stuff. I don't have to pay attention to, not necessarily pay attention to it, but I don't hold it with as much value as I would have if I knew you were coming from a defined state.
Mm,
So you saying that actually helped me realize that no, every time you express yourself, no matter what's going on, you're coming from a defined state.
mhm,
And growing up, I've seen this in media so many times where a woman would express something and there will be a question followed up about her hormones.
mhm.
That's what actually taught me that. Well, I should say that's what actually misled me into believing that hormones can make a woman say things she don't really mean, complain about things that she wouldn't normally complain about, get angry about things she wouldn't normally get angry about. So therefore, you have to know what to filter out, what to dismiss and what to keep. So I'm glad that you said that because I really had to learn that no, everything she says she means. Like you said, it may come out in a different form in
It
an
may be a little bit more aggressive than
right,
others, or it may be tears one time, and sometimes it just may be a regular conversation. But at the end of the day, it's coming from a place where these are my emotions. These are
right,
things that I'm feeling and I'm dealing with. And I feel like a lot of the conversations we do have in those moments are usually pretty in depth conversations. You know what I mean? I don't know everyone else's story. And again, I'm speaking from my point of view. So again, it may be different from another woman where she may be PMSing. I don't know. But for me, yeah, you do get moody different times of the month. That's just what it is. But a lot of the conversations we tend to have are pretty in depth, where it's not just, oh, I don't feel pretty today. While we do have those moments, but that's not a conversation. Do you get what I mean?
right,
I feel like when it is a conversation, despite what emotions come along while having that conversation, it's still a conversation about something that means something to me.
right.
So I feel like the dismissive aspect is an important factor because even if you don't say it, it shows. So if your significant other knows you, they can pick up on it. Like I know I pick up on it. And I've told you this before where there are a lot of times where you tell me I should be more vocal about what may be frustrating me. And in the back of my mind, I'm like, for what? Honestly, I'll tell myself, like, I know I should, but what is it going to do if you're just going to look at me like I have five heads anyway? You're not going to take it serious enough for us to solve it.
I've heard guys say this before. Don't look at how I'm saying it, but listen to what I'm saying.
Hmm.
And that's a mentality that guys have amongst each other.
Interesting. I think that that's a general thing for human beings
Believe it or
sometimes, but
not, at least myself, I did not believe that women thought that way as well.
mm,
I thought it was the opposite. And the reason why I'm bringing this up now is because, as you just mentioned, everything that you express, you actually feel. It
mhm.
may come out in an exaggerated form, whether that's being frustrated, angry, or whatever it might be. And I think that's the part that causes men to just dismiss not just the emotion, but the entire conversation.
Mhm.
I know I've thought to myself, I don't recognize where this emotion is coming from. So let me dismiss the emotion along with the conversation.
Ooh, I see.
Right.
Yeah, and in my opinion, I would love it if you focus more on what's being said
Right.
to you rather than if I'm saying it and it's coming out with an attitude, or if I'm saying it and I happen to start crying in the middle of it. More so what we're talking about. And also knowing your spouse, because I feel like with me and you, like I said, I'm not the type to have a conversation about something unless I feel like it's necessary. Like I said, we're not going to have a conversation about how I look in the moment. Yeah, I may be throwing comments like if I'm feeling a little bloated or if I don't look how I would like to look in that moment or whatever the case is. Those are not conversations. That I could understand if you're thinking like, oh, she's complaining again. While you shouldn't though, but I can understand that. But if it's a conversation where I start a discussion with you, no matter how it comes out, although I would always try to be aware of how it is given, I do think in cases like that, it's best to focus on what's being said.
Mm.
And I think that's also the thing too. I could be wrong, but it often seems like men don't read between the lines and we do. So, like you said, you guys are very practical. You're very like A, B, C, D. Since when was there something in between?
Right. That's exactly what I'm thinking. Like, why are we reading between the lines when there's words on the lines? Just
I get that. I totally get that, especially now that I have a better understanding of how men think. I understand that, but you're dealing with someone. Naturally, if you were dealing with a kid, not saying that women are children, but I do this with you, to be honest with you. You may say one thing with your mouth. You have to read body language. You have to observe and notice if the actions are matching what was said. That's usually how I know if something is stressing you out or if something's wrong or if you're feeling a little bit off. You don't tell me you're feeling off. It's usually, yeah, I'm fine. Yeah, I'm okay. But I read between the lines, and it would be nice if the same effort was put.
I definitely get that, but I'm going to tell you the fear
Mhm.
that men have with reading between the lines for women. So let's say, just using a random example, you said that you don't want crab legs for dinner.
I'm done. What an example to choose. Go ahead.
But I'm reading your body language. I said crab legs, and all of a sudden you look like you want crab legs. You know, I could tell by your face.
Okay.
I go and I get you crab
This
legs.
example's killing me.
I go and get you crab legs. Now you say to me, I specifically said I don't want crab legs. So now I'm looking like I know what you said, but I felt like you really wanted this. I know it's a silly example, but I
Yes,
think
it is.
you want me to come up with another
No, no,
example?
no. Go ahead. Do your thing.
But I think that's the fear of men is
Misinterpreting.
misinterpreting, and
That's
now
fine.
it's going to look like you purposely went out your way
To go against what I
to
said.
go against what they said.
Know your woman. I know it sounds annoying to hear that, but legit, you have to know your woman. Now, if it's the beginning of your relationship, obviously you're going to have to learn that. We make mistakes in order to learn. There were times I asked you, what are you thinking about? And you literally will tell me about this episode in Seinfeld. And I'm like, oh, damn, I read that wrong. But that's a silly example,
Yeah.
but that is how you gain a better understanding of who you're with. Like, that's how you learn. You're not going to get it right all the time. And hopefully you're with a woman who understands that, but still shows appreciation for you trying to understand what was actually happening in that moment and converse about it. So that way it's not, taken the wrong way. But you should know who you're with. And if you don't, you should try to observe a little bit more and learn who you're with. I know that's probably not the practical answer you were expecting because it causes you guys to think a little bit more. And you've told me this before. You don't want to have to think, but you need to.
It's not the thinking part, it's the dealing with the consequences of being wrong part.
Okay, I get that. But I do feel like in that case, you should have a conversation and then have a plan. As silly as that may sound, but we've had conversations where, especially like in the beginning of us like getting to know one another, when I would go mute, you naturally thought I was upset at you. But in order for you to understand where that was coming from and what it actually was, that took, yes, a lot of misinterpretations and potentially maybe debates. But once we had a mature conversation about it, you understood what it was. And now it does not cause any back and forth in any way. So I feel like if you really are trying to understand the person that you're with, you need to have a conversation with them about something or some things that may be affecting your relationship in any way. Crab legs was a terrible example, but in a serious case, a conversation can be had. If you misinterpreted something, then bring that up to that person. At least that's what I would want. Again, this is my perspective. If you misinterpreted something, which I'm sure there are many cases where that has happened, I would want you to then tell me, like, I know you said this, but I really thought maybe you just didn't want to share that with me, or you were maybe being considerate. So I went out my way to do it anyway. Anyone in their right mind who has a man who will do that for them, after that conversation, will be appreciative of him. That's how I see it.
I would also add to that, to the men out there, don't be afraid to be wrong. That's what it boils down to.
Basically,
you're going
you
to
have
be
to
wrong,
learn,
right?
And in order to learn, you're gonna make a few mistakes,
right?
That's okay.
You're going to be wrong. Just get rid of that fear of being wrong in order to build towards something better. That's what my advice.
And
would be.
vocalizing in a respectful way after the fact. Don't just assume, which a lot of people do both ways. We assume things and we just think to ourselves, I bet I ain't doing that no more. Rather than just having a conversation and telling them this was your intention. And if it's coming from a good place and the person you're speaking to is mature, you can find a middle ground and a better understanding of that person. So next time you can do better, and they will then try to express better too, because now they know.
I didn't think crab legs was that bad of an example, but listen, I'm working on the spot.
So that among many other factors can cause issues in relationships now when creating a safe space for a woman, because obviously we said the misinterpretation of what they're expressing, being dismissive. And I also think part of it is accountability, at least in my perspective. I often have to think about it and recognize that you sometimes can't create the safe space that I want because I don't provide you with the information that you need to do so.
Mm.
And I think that's important to look at. And I've said this to you not too long ago, but as we discussed in the past episode, yes, men tend to be viewed as being able to control their emotions, and society expects them to not be vulnerable. They're not allowed to cry, so on and so forth. And I feel like sometimes people don't recognize how that can often occur with women as well, particularly Black women. I'm going to say that. From my point of view, I know I felt that. It's not as extreme as it is for you guys, but in society, there is a label on us to be strong. We hear it all the time. Strong Black woman. It's on BET. There are movies that are made out of that title. Like, it's been within society for so long that we probably can't even remember when was the first time we heard it. As a Black woman, I know I've always been exposed to that mentality. Even growing up in a Haitian household, it wasn't said in those particular words, but it was shown, and it was said in different ways. And I feel like sometimes because men are so used to being the one that are labeled as not being able to be vulnerable, that they don't recognize that in their women. So I know I've always seen it in my family, and I've always heard it in different ways. We're required to provide support to our man, serve our children, be nurturing. If they have a bad day, deal with it. A lot of the things that people, I think, tend to bypass when it comes to the woman. We just think like, oh yeah, she's allowed to cry, so she's fine. But like I told you earlier, although yeah, it's more accepted for me to cry than it is for you, I feel like there's a pressure of perfectionism that is placed on us that is often overlooked from society. And just as we mentioned in the previous episode, there are a lot of things that the man has to deal with outside of his home that he comes home to and have to still deal with those things with the people that he lives with. And I think it's similar with us too. So women, specifically Black women, are often illustrated as the nurturer, the caregiver, not just for our families, but in history, it's been a thing for the Black woman to be the caregiver for even white families. And I don't want to touch too much into like the whole race thing, but I wanted to mention that because sometimes we don't recognize where certain mindsets stem from. And
Mm.
so I was like, you know what? Let me look this up to see how far back it goes. And I was able to find some interesting information. Have you ever heard the term mammy?
Yeah, I have.
Okay. What's your take on it?
Well, from old movies, I know I've heard it. And it's almost as if like they're calling not a butler or something to that extent. I could be way off, but it's someone who's a caregiver, I think.
Yeah, you're right. So yeah, so the term mammy was used back in the I think the 1800s. Yeah, at some point in the 1800s, and it was basically to define a Black slave caregiver.
Oh wow.
During slavery days, the Black woman would be required to cook, clean, take care of the white children. And again, I don't want to touch too much on race, but we've seen too often how history repeats itself and history affects the current day and how we view things. Even in movies and roles that they have Black women playing, it naturally creates this perception in your mind that you don't recognize. They put us in positions to represent as a caregiver or a nurturer. We put our feelings aside. You have to take care of your man, which there's nothing wrong with doing those things. But again, I'm saying all this just to help men recognize that the same way you feel like you have
Mm.
no space in society or you can't be vulnerable, understand that there's a level of it to your woman as well. We're not the same, so it's never going to be the same experience. But that mindset of strength has been put on us as well. We're supposed to, despite what we're feeling or dealing with throughout the day, it has always been known in Black culture, your man comes home, he's treated as a king. And a lot of times being treated as a queen and you said this the last episode, people just think of provide and protect. A lot of people don't recognize that we also need that emotional support as well. You understand? So I actually Googled strong Black woman just to see what will pop up because I'm like, let me make sure what I'm thinking matches up. And the first thing that I noticed, literally, image of perfection and strength.
Wow.
And it says it stems from stereotypes placed on enslaved Black women to neglect themselves, restrain from emotion, and take on the problems of others while illustrating independence. Don't that sound like now?
Wow.
And you know how I feel about that because that's a whole different story, but it's to segregate, in my opinion, between the man and woman, and rather than focusing on unity and understanding each other. But point is that in a space where, like you said last time, men feel like they can't be vulnerable, I think it's important to understand that we also have that in a different way. It's not as extreme as you guys when it comes to society, but it is that case. We've had multiple conversations. Like when I used to work, I always felt like for the most part, there was only a few people who looked like me in the room. And anytime someone expressed themselves or felt the need to be vocal to stand up for what their decision was or what they believed, they were always labeled as dramatic or angry. But as we discussed in the previous episode, if you didn't hear it, go listen. As we discussed in the previous episode, when you internalize emotions, it comes out in a different form. And one of those forms tend to be anger. So it clearly shows that while we have more outlets than men do, there's still a lack of outlet for us if we don't feel safe in expressing our emotions. So the same way society needs to allow men to be human, I think that's something that also needs to be considered for the woman that is supporting that man.
Wow. I really appreciate you sharing that. So many things went through my mind as you were speaking and doing the breakdown. First, how we said this literally earlier today, how it's hard to realize how programmed you are.
Mm-hmm.
How we tend to think of being programmed as, following the masses or something to that extent. But look at how a simple programming that appeared positive came from such negative roots.
Mm-hmm.
And one key difference between men and women is men can provide and protect, but they won't necessarily neglect themselves. They'll always
never thought of
find
that.
time to do whatever it is that they want to do, whether that's, going and getting their haircut, going to the gym, hanging out with their friends, even playing video games. Men will always find that time for themselves. And as you were speaking, it made me reflect that women don't have that time. And on top of that, the Strong Black Woman program ensures that you don't have that time because there's always someone else to take care of.
We're going to have to cut the episode here and continue the conversation next week. So come back, same place, same time as usual. We'll continue the conversation on creating safe spaces for women. Thank you for spending your time with us. We hope you gained some knowledge today that'll promote poise in your life. We have new episodes uploaded every Thursday right here, same place, same time. Until next time, you can follow us on Instagram at Noir Poise Podcast to stay connected. That's NOIRPOISED Podcast. We'd love to hear your feedback.
And remember, your wisdom is power.